There is one service your Chevy dealer will flat out refuse to do, then turn around and charge you $800 for the day your truck finally breaks. A transmission fluid change. GM spent years telling you that you never needed one. Then a federal court started reading their own internal emails out loud. Number 1. The Fill for Life Con. Go grab the owner's manual out of your Chevy Silverado or your Tahoe and look for a transmission fluid change interval under the normal maintenance schedule. You will not find one. General Motors calls it Fill for Life. The catch is right there in the same manual if you keep flipping. Under the severe duty schedule, they want that fluid and filter done at 45,000 miles. So now ask yourself what General Motors calls severe duty, towing a trailer, hauling weight in the bed, crawling through stop-and-go traffic in the heat up and down hills. That is not some extreme edge case. That is a truck doing truck things. I think the Fill for Life line is the single biggest lie told on a dealership lot, and a guy I follow on the truck forums put it better than I ever could. He said filled for life really means filled for the life of the warranty. Once you are past that, the transmission is your problem. But the worst part is that General Motors already knew their fluid was the problem, and they had the receipts to prove it. Number 2. The 8-speed shudder GM saw coming a decade ago. If you own a Silverado, a Sierra, a Tahoe, a Camaro, or a Corvette from around 2015 to 2019 with the 8-speed, you might feel a vibration that comes on at a steady cruise, usually between 35 and 55 miles per hour. It feels like the truck just rolled onto rumble strips on the side of the highway. That is the torque converter clutch slipping. And the reason it slips is the factory fluid. The original 8-speed fluid absorbs moisture over time, the clutch loses its grip, and the whole truck buzzes. According to a federal lawsuit, a GM engineer drove a test car back in 2013 and flat out wrote that the shudder was terrible. GM sold roughly 2 million of these anyway. When they finally landed on a fix, a fresh blue label Mobil 1 fluid, the lawsuit says GM ran the math. Fixing every truck would have cost somewhere near $592 million, so they put the new fluid in unsold inventory and never said a word to the people who already bought one. I had a 2016 Silverado come into the shop buzzing exactly like that. Caught it early, flushed in the corrected fluid, and the owner drove off thinking I was a magician. The guy who waits is the one who burns the clutch material right off the converter and turns a fluid job into a $4,000 rebuild. Now I want to be fair because a court tossed the class part of that lawsuit in 2025, so owners have to fight it one truck at a time now. But knowing the fix is half the battle, and the other half is making sure the shop pours in the right stuff. Number 3. The wrong fluid will kill your Chevy faster than skipping the change ever could. GM does not use one fluid across the lineup, and this trips up even the dealers. The 6-speed trucks take Dexron 6. The 8-speed takes Dexron HP, and the shudder fix is that specific Mobil 1 version of it. The 10-speed takes Dexron ULV, which stands for ultra-low viscosity and is thin enough that you have to shake the bottle before you pour it. And the CVT cars take their own dedicated fluid that is not even an automatic transmission fluid in the normal sense. 4 different specs, and they are not interchangeable, no matter what the label on a jug of universal fluid promises you. Even the early Dexron HP bottles wrongly claimed you could use them in place of the older fluid, and GM had to go back and fix the label. Pour the wrong one in, and you change the pressure the transmission uses to grab its own clutches, and you get slipping, hard shifts, or a dead unit. I promise you there is a quick lube shop somewhere right now reaching for one jug to fill all of them. Watch what goes in your truck, so you know the right fluid. Therefore, the next thing everybody asks me is whether it is too late to start. Number 4. The high mileage gamble everybody gets wrong. Say you bought a used Tahoe with 150,000 miles and the seller never touched the fluid. Should you change it now? Half my comments section will swear that changing it will blow the transmission, and there is a real reason people believe that. On a neglected unit, the old burnt fluid gets thick and gummy, and it is basically acting like a bandage over worn clutches. Fresh fluid with fresh cleaner in it rips that bandage off, and the worn parts finally show how bad they really are. So the transmission acts up right after the change and everybody blames the fluid. But a rebuilder I trust says it best. Clean fluid has never killed a transmission in the history of the world. The 150,000 miles of neglect did the damage. The fluid change just stopped lying about it. And speaking of doing more harm than good, this next one is where trying to help kills the transmission. Number 5. Never let a chain shop flush a neglected Chevy. A flush forces fluid through under pressure, and on a transmission full of varnish and debris, that pressure shoves the junk into the valve body passages and clutch packs where it does real damage. I saw a forum post from a guy with a 2018 Tahoe whose 6-speed came apart within about 50 miles of a quick lube flush. Now I will be straight with you. The dealer does use a machine to swap that 8-speed fluid too, and that one is fine, because it is GM's own fix on a healthy transmission. The dangerous one is the high-pressure flush slammed onto a transmission that has been ignored for 100,000 miles. On a neglected truck, you drop the pan, swap the filter, refill, drive it a while, and do it again. The gentle way wins every time. If this is keeping you out of the rebuild shop, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I put out one of these every week. Now back to it, because the 6-speed has its own way of emptying your wallet. Number 6. The 6-speed will hand you a $3,800 bill for ignoring a $150 job. The 6-speed in the older Silverados and Tahoes is a workhorse, but it has its own shudder problem and a couple of weak internal parts that crack when the fluid gets cooked. A shop documented a 2015 Silverado that rolled in at 118,000 miles with zero service history. The fluid was nearly black, the filter was clogged solid, and the clutch packs were burnt. The bill to rebuild it came to almost $3,800. That entire mess would have been prevented by a $150 fluid and filter service done on time. This thing takes Dexron 6 and only Dexron 6. Put a cheap multi-vehicle fluid in it, and you will be chasing shudder and sticky shifts within a year. I think the 6-speed is one of the most forgiving transmissions GM ever built, right up until the moment you decide to never touch it. Now, if you drive one of the newer Chevy cars instead of a truck, you have a completely different animal under you, and it is the least forgiving of the bunch. Number 7. The CVT will die the instant you put the wrong fluid in it. The newer Malibu, the Trailblazer, even the Trax all use this kind of CVT, which works with a chain and pulleys instead of gears. It needs its own dedicated General Motors fluid, and I mean its own. General Motors flat out says in its own service write-up that this is the only fluid allowed in there. Pour regular automatic transmission fluid into a CVT, and you have basically poured in sand, because the friction is all wrong for how a CVT grips. Owners are reporting these losing forward drives somewhere around 60 to 90,000 miles, sometimes flat out quitting on you in the fast lane with traffic stacked up behind you. General Motors does not slap the Fill for Life label on this one quite so loudly, and good, because you should be draining and filling it every 30,000 miles or so. If a shop ever tells you a CVT and a regular automatic transmission take the same fluid, take your keys back and leave. But the scariest transmission story General Motors has right now is not the one that strands you. It is the one that can put you in a ditch. Number 8. The 10-speed recall the federal government had to step in on. The 10-speed in the newer trucks and big SUV models, the one General Motors built together with Ford, has a valve body that wears out, and when it wears, it can momentarily lock the rear wheels. Federal safety regulators recalled nearly 500,000 diesel trucks and full-size SUV models over it. Owners reported the truck shuddering and then slamming a downshift hard enough to make it skid. Some described nearly jackknifing a trailer. The government counted close to a dozen vehicles that ran off the road and a few injuries. Then the recall grew to cover Camaros and Cadillacs, and then a batch of Tahoes, Suburbans, Yukons, and Escalades on top of that. Here is what gets me. The recall fix is mostly a software patch that catches the wear early and drops the truck into a limp mode. But there is also a special coverage that runs 15 years or 150,000 miles and pays for the actual valve body repair. And it will even pay you back if you already covered it yourself. I get questions about this one in the comments every single week, so listen close. If you own one of these, go find out if that coverage applies before you spend a dime. And once you decide you do want this fluid changed, General Motors has built in one more obstacle just to push you back to the dealer. Number 9. The no dipstick trap and the clueless service counter. The 8-speed and 10-speed transmissions do not have a dipstick. To check or fill them, the truck has to be level, the fluid has to be at a specific temperature, and you pump it in from underneath and watch for the overflow. That sends most people straight to the dealer, where the bill runs $600 to $900. I read about one dealer charging nearly $500 just to exchange the fluid with no filter at all. And the service counters often have no idea what they are doing. One owner was told by his dealer that the 10-speed was sealed up and should never be touched, while two other dealers quoted him 30,000-mile and 50,000-mile intervals for the exact same truck. That is 3 different answers for one transmission. Here is a money saver. Some dealers will let you bring your own correct fluid and only charge you around $99 for the labor. And there are bolt-on dipsticks you can buy that make checking it yourself a whole lot easier. So after all of this, does babying the fluid actually do anything? Because one Chevy out there answered that question in a way I cannot argue with. Number 10, the proof, and the honest limit of it. There is an owner running an older Chevy with a 420,000-mile transmission who pulled the dipstick to show people the fluid was still bright red. Regular changes, that was the whole secret. Compare that to a guy who admitted he got lazy and skipped the fluid and filter 100,000 miles ago, and now his is slipping. I am going to be straight with you though, because I am not going to sell you a fairy tale. That 400,000-mile story is on an older, simpler transmission. You are probably not going to put that kind of mileage on a brand new 10-speed, but that is not the point. On these newer transmissions, changing the fluid early is how you catch the shudder before it eats the torque converter, and how you stay ahead of the valve body wear before it becomes a $4,000 surprise. The fluid does not make these transmissions immortal. It just keeps you out of the rebuild shop, which is the whole game. So here is where I land on all of it. The people who change the fluid early almost never end up paying for a transmission. The people who believe the fill for life line almost always do. And when your dealer looks you in the eye and tells you the fluid lasts forever, just smile, take your truck somewhere that knows the difference between Dexron 6 and CVT fluid, and get it done right. If you want to understand why some Chevys just refuse to die, go watch my video on the shocking truth behind Chevy's legendary small block 350 V8. There is a reason that one engine outlasted everything GM built around it, and once you see what they quietly changed on the later ones, you will never look at a used 350 the same way again.